All right. Thank you guys for joining us here on this month's ThunderCast. I've got with me, as always, Tyler the T Rex Baker
What's going on? Glad to be here again, guys.
and number one Marmaduke fan.
Thank you for having me on.
So, we got some interesting topics to discuss this time. We're going to start with a character discussion and retrospective of one of, if not the best, Thundercat, Panthro. Tyler, would you like to lead us?
Oh God, yeah. Uh, by far, it definitely could be argued as the best Thundercat. I always feel like I have an alliance to Lion because he's been my favorite since I discovered Thundercats when I was 3 years old. But Panthro grew to be a favorite of mine in my teens. Um, just how he's portrayed, how serious the character is, really the brute of the group, but not uh, a very intelligent brute, so to speak. You know, definitely feels like he's at times has a bit of temper almost, but somewhat controlled. But I like how most of the Thundercats they don't have like archetypes. That they're all very wise. They're young, but they don't come off as like like Panther. I almost feel like some people would say was like the grizzled war veteran almost, but he by no means is that. You know, he's a technician, but he's young. He's not, kind of like Man at Arms. He's not Man at Arms, even though he is. But I like that there's not really an age difference almost, aside from Lino being the youngest of the group and Wily Kid and Cat. But you kind of feel like there's an equal balance amongst everybody. And Panther to me just stands out as next to Lino is like the strongest and most badass with the nunchucks and just overall, I think he's got the best visual look.
All right, Marmaduke, let's hear your thoughts on the character Panthro.
He's dope. He's like the one I would have thought was coolest when I was a little kid. I think. I mean, it's interesting. What's interesting for me is kind of when I first looked at him, I thought, okay, that's the big strong guy, right? And then you find out he's really their tech geek, but he also has like this trait that he really loves his car and he builds his car. It's just a nice little human aspect to him that he loves the things he builds and he's always working on a technological solution to a problem. And the voice actor helps a lot too because it's got that sort of musical quality. It's just dope. I think he adds a lot of variety to the cast.
All right, so my thoughts on Panthro is I do enjoy him on multiple levels. Number one, the fact that Earl Hyman did his voice, old Grandpa Huxtable, is just a perfect casting job. The Hear the Roar book that goes into detail makes it very clear he is very much so what's called a black coded character. He is there to represent African Americans, and he did so in a very interesting way. At no point was Panthro ever depicted as a stereotype in any aspect. He was probably age wise, probably the oldest of the core group, not by much, I'm sure, but probably the oldest of the core group. But he had a lot of wisdom to him, but really practical wisdom. He never goes on long diatribes. He likes keeping conversations short, but he's also just, despite his gruff demeanor, he's a really friendly guy. And usually, when you have a character in fiction that's the big Hulk character, the big gruff character, the big strong one, usually they're either mental midgets or they're just mean. And Panthro is neither of those things. Panthro is sharp. He's intelligent. He's a very skilled combatant. And honestly, I really like how they designed his nunchucks because nunchucks as a martial arts weapon, they're very limited due to the fact that they're basically just peasant cudgels or
Right.
peasant flails. But what they did with his design was they made it a multifaceted weapon, and that's just really creative, and I enjoy it so much. He's a really fun character. He's a really well rounded one. I really enjoy him.
I never really pictured him as being like a character that would represent the black community because I kind of felt like they were kind of they transcended gender and ethnicity, so to speak. I kind of felt like it, look and a lot of cartoons of the '80s, and maybe it's because I'm a white blonde haired guy. I don't know, but I just never saw it as anything that would find relatable to a certain ethnicity because I kind of felt like an Asian child, African American child, an Italian child could find Lino to be a badass, much like I could find like my brother's favorite Thundercat is Tigra. Just kind of just almost felt like there was really like nothing specific to where you could really just kind of relate to just whoever you thought was the most badass, so to speak. Aside from Chitara and Kumara being the women of the group, you know, the boys probably find them hot, and if girls did watch it, I'm sure there were at some point, they find them relatable because they're portrayed as strong characters. And I don't know. I guess I just never ever think to look towards that kind of stuff being depicted. Even when I watch like Bionic 6, and you see JD, here's the black member of the Bionic 6. Like he just comes off as just like one of the guys. Like I don't look at him as Am I going too far into race relations with this here?
Not really. The reason why I bring up is that the coding is because it's directly brought up in the book that his looks, his name, and all that was supposed to what's the word? I can't remember the word they used, but basically it's supposed to be a parallel and to show you that this is that ethnicity within the setting of ThunderCats. So that's where I'm getting my information from when it comes to that. And because ThunderCats is a cartoon and as such art is open to multiple interpretations. So your interpretation, Tyler, is no less valid than anyone's.
Yeah, and which I mean, I certainly can appreciate them doing that. And Earl Hyman's voice, I mean, to me it's a great balance of warmth, but God, you would get on his bad side. I mean, he really pushes the anger and intensity of Panthro when he's ready to fight. But also maintains a level-headedness, you know, like when he's taking on Slide and Slaves of Castle Plundar, like he's just as confident as ever. And doesn't lose his cool too much. I always think of like the Ghost War when he loses his temper when part of the electronic equipment gets slammed up against him by Groon, and he just comes out pissed off. You know? and that's just one of those things like, oh my God, like, man, Panthro's pissed. But I just feel like he's a very, I guess I have to agree too. He is kind of like the older of the group, a little bit more experienced, but I also feel like Tigra is kind of the more stoic.
Oh, he is.
Almost like, even though he's younger than Panthro, probably his intelligence probably transcends Panthro's a bit more.
I mean, if Tigra is an architect, Panthro is an engineer, so they have different ways of approaching problems. You know, like Tigra has the ability to kind of understand the layout of a building, right? So what I love is, you know, even the episode we're going to talk about, there's this theme of Lino having to learn to use their abilities to the best of his ability. They have different areas of expertise that make them useful in different situations.
Well, one thing I really like about Panthro is he has a sense of humor, but it's not like some of the other characters to where Tigra, he can be kind of a smart aleck. Lion-O can absolutely be one, but Panthro, he's very tongue-in-cheek, like in the episode The Mountain, I think it is, when the mutants find out their guns don't work, and Panthro pulls out his nunchucks, and they're like, you wouldn't hit an unarmed enemy, would you? And Panthro just smiles and says, try me. They take off running, because that's his sense of humor, and I really appreciate it.
I love how we managed to bring up the mountain multiple times.
It's a good episode. I love that episode.
It's an episode that, you know, of course, I don't get to see a whole lot of fan response in terms of like people recognizing certain episodes. So I'm glad that you like that episode, and I can't wait to hear what Marmaduke's. I mean, like when we get around to that, almost as if like, you know what, like he just needs to check it out sometime in the near future, because it's for such a simple episode and kind of the storyline that we've seen in so many really good cartoons where the villains have to team up with the heroes to a certain extent. It's a great survival of the fittest story that definitely is heavily underlooked. It's a shame that never got a VHS release back in the 80s.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of episodes didn't, and I don't really know why, but you know, at least we have DVD now. We kind of wish we had unedited episodes, especially when it came to the first 4, but Warner Brothers hasn't, I guess, decided they needed to do that yet. So there's a lot about Panthro's character. And the interesting thing is, you know, whereas a lot of people look at Panthro's design and might see ninja, I don't know if this is something intentional, but if you look how Panthro fights, it's kind of funny. His fighting style, what they seem to actually base it on, is actually leopard kung fu, leopard style kung fu, which Panthro being a panther and a leopard is a type
Yeah.
of panther. I think it fits. And also the bracelets and spikes he has are very well known in certain kung fu circles. So I think that there was more to his design element than unfortunately I'm going to have access to. But I find him a really rounded character. I love his design. I just think he really stands out visually when it comes to how they were portrayed, because they could have gone in one direction and they didn't. They could have gone in another direction, they didn't. So they picked this middle of the line that just has a fantastic contrast both in color, design, tone, and characterization. Like there's a reason why a lot of Thundercat fans, their favorite character is Panthro. It's not just because he has nunchucks in the tank. It's because of who he is as a character.
That's why, because I never, as a kid, I never pegged him as a ninja. And I don't know why. I didn't really kind of associate those. I guess because I really didn't. Nunchucks was more recognizable to me when Turtles came along. So with Thundercats, it just didn't register to me because I was all about Lion-O. Even though I loved the core group, there wasn't a member of the group I did not like. But it just didn't resonate with me as much as Mikey with the nunchucks. And then I got older and then realized that people associated him as being the ninja. But even throughout most of the show, like he does know martial arts, but I don't look at him as the martial artist of the group because I feel like it's not used as prominent.
No, it wasn't. And unfortunately, the reason for that is, well, you know what happened in the 80s. Parents were always worried, oh, what if Timmy sees violence on television? So they gotta cut things back. But one thing that's just a fun fact, and again, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but Panthro's strength is actually a really interesting thing because compared to every other big cat, a leopard, pound for pound, is the strongest of them.
Huh.
Yeah, they are able to take prey twice their size up into trees to eat them. They are massively strong. It's crazy.
One of the things I like about the show in general, and Panthro illustrates this, is they're sort of subconsciously aware of how a fighting style or how skills would affect the way you fight. So for Panthro, like the image I think of is him physically picking up Slide and holding him over his head, I think in episode 3 or 4. And that's the kind of thing that only you could only imagine that with Panthro doing that, right? Like not even a Lion-O, who's a big, strong guy too. You can't picture him using that kind of a tactic because Lion-O's more like the charging, heroically with his sword type of guy. They use aspects of their physical traits in how they engage or, defeat their enemies. And I think that's a real big appeal because it's easy to miss that. I mean, it's not that hard if you think a lot about, like fighting styles. Easy for someone just to write them all the same and how, like, oh, they beat the bad guys, right? And there's no variety in that. All of that is just sort of like a subtextual thing. Like no one points at Panthro and says, oh, wow, you're so strong. You can pick him up over your head. It's just a subtle aspect which reinforces the type of character he is.
Well, Panthro's hands are rated E for everyone.
Pretty much, and I also enjoy the fact too. Like it's really, I guess too. If they don't really come out and say it, they pretty much imply it with the trials. Because the first trial is the trial of strength, and Lion-O having to take on Panthro for strength, like that clearly labels it without coming out and just saying. I mean, they obviously talk about, he's got to match, strength with Panthro. But, I mean, that's really the only time it's come out and just said that Panthro is by far the strongest of the group up to that point until Lion-O beat. But, yeah, that's I like that they kind of dance around it, but they don't beat you over the head with, all their qualities, like it's just there, it's implied, and it's there when they need it. It's not constantly reminding the audience, he's the strongest of the group and kind of making, jokes and nods about it. It's just, God, it's just such great storytelling. And I'm so offended when people want to knock ThunderCats in any sense. And I just felt like it's, one of those cartoons that people just talk about, but not too often actually take the time to watch.
Well, that's one reason why I've got the YouTube channel to talk about these things to a wide audience. But one thing you were talking about as far as storytelling, a really good key to Panthro's character and his strength that they did was actually in the second episode. Because when Panthro's like just chucking things out of it, like fussing and cussing about it, like, it's going to bring a junk. And then he just walks out and he's like, How does it look? Oh, no, not too bad. Just completely shifts his tone of voice, because when he's talking to people, it's not the same as when he's talking to things, right? But he also picks up a massive pipe. He's like, the key to survival is staying calm. And he just gracefully just bends it right back into place without any strain. And that right there is really good key visual of show, don't tell. He didn't have to talk about, oh, look how strong I am. He just does it, and it keys to the audience.
Yep.
Don't dick with this guy. He's really strong, and he will twist you into the shape that tube was if you mess with him. That was really clever, and I think it's really good example of what animation should do with a character.
Also in Trouble with Time, he sees someone messing around with the Thunder Tank, and it's like, I'm gonna pulverize them into atoms or something like that. And then he hops in and sees it's Lion-O, and he's instantly cool.
I'm gonna smash him into sonic smithereens.
Yes.
I mean, what man isn't like that? Who's touching my tank? He's got a sixth sense like most parents do about the thermostat. All right, so that's a good segue. Let's go ahead and jump on into Trouble with Time. Tyler, what are your thoughts of this episode?
It's kind of a filler episode, but it's also a world-building episode because we're introduced to the Tree Maidens in this episode, and I like that faction a lot. I always enjoy it when they show up. I'm not too fond of Queen Willa's voice. I think it's just not. When I was rewatching it too, I'm like, God, I can't pinpoint why I can't stand her. Like, I don't know how to describe it.
It's too shrill.
It sounds like someone said, imitate a weird foreign accent, and that's just a kind of a made up weird foreign accent. It doesn't give her much ability to emote or express emotion because she has to do this, you know.
Well, there's also the unfortunate fact that they only had one female voice actress for the first season. So all that was Lynn Lipton, the same person who did Chitara, and she had to do every single female in the series up to that point.
Wow. And she does a great job for the most part, but some voice actors, I think of Linda Gary, where she's not really changing her voice drastically to play the Sorceress Queen Marlena and Teela. She does change a lot for Evil Lynn, but there's variations of her voice that work well, and I kind of felt like I can't remember the other Tree Maiden's name, the one that we see prominently more often. She's just
Nada.
What's that?
Nada.
I like hers a lot.
Yeah.
Plus, she's a beautifully animated character too, and I like that we got to see quite a bit of her throughout the series. But man, Will is just like nails on a chalkboard. It's just I just wish they'd have pushed Lynn a little bit more to come up with something a little bit more of a variety, because it makes, even though I like the character and I like how she's portrayed, I like her distrustfulness of Lion-O at first, a tribe of women that sees intruders as enemies, especially men. But I'm like, man, it's stuff like that to me. Like it's like art in a comic book. If you have ugly art, you're gonna have a hard time getting me to give it a shot. With bad voice acting, thankfully it's a good story overall. But I guess what I was trying to say is I do feel like it's kind of an episode that doesn't really provide a whole lot other than introducing us to the Tree Maidens, and that's really about it.
All right, I'll go ahead and give Marmaduke a chance to speak his thoughts on the episode.
I like this one. I like it's called a Lizathon, if I remember right. So that was like a great money shot, right? With like the close up on the eye and the cross hatching, and then it zips out and you see its drooling teeth as it roars. That's just like yes, alien T-Rex moment. Beautifully animated. So that alone puts it in, like, I really enjoyed the whole thing because of that moment. Plus the Cave of Time itself was really primally terrifying. And just the fact that it took out Tigra so dang quick, I think it's just a good, I don't know if they ever revisit it again, but as far as world building, it's just a good illustration of like the danger involved of exploring a dangerous world. Like, it could have been a monster, it could have been anything, but just the idea of walking into that cave and you're so weak you can't escape while you're dying, just kind of spooked me out really as an adult. So I dug that. All right, but I didn't get the healing fountain. Why doesn't Lion-O go in the healing fountain so that he can restore his youth that he lost in the time capsule? What?
Well, there's several reasons. Number one, and I touched on this in one of my videos, is Especially in the 80s, the last thing you want is a show where a 12-year-old kid runs around with a sword.
Right.
So there's that. And honestly, it would be a really, really regressive backstep.
Yeah.
I think if you're 12 and you wake up and you have the body of like a freaking Atlas man, your first thought isn't, man, I wish I was small and weak again.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Tyler. Tyler, do you wish you were tiny and small like a child again?
No, I wanted to be like this when I was, 4 and 5. So
All right.
Now that's the kind of thing where they could retcon that in an interesting way. Because what if it's only like single use? Like Lion-O could go back, but obviously he has to let his friend go because his friend comes first. I feel like if they had if someone in the writing had asked that question, that could have been an opportunity for like a really interesting thing, either to explain like it can't work because the magic only works once, or it only works on people cursed by the cave, or they could have made it like a nice, like self-sacrificial moment for Lion-O. But overall, one of the big things I dig about this episode is what a good job it does kind of tying the lesson for Lion-O naturally into the story. Like in a couple of them, it's felt a little PSA-ish, a little, okay, they stuck the moral on there. But for this, it's just, it perfectly fits with the plot of the story. And it's really thoughtful because Lion-O has been a charge into battle without a plan type of guy this whole time. And he finally gets confronted on that directly.
Lion-O, wait. That could be the tagline for the first 20 episodes of the show. No, Lion-O, wait. But if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and give my thoughts on the episode. Firstly, I'm glad that number one, the animation's back to par, because unfortunately with Terror Hammerhand, it got outsourced apparently, or a newer crew was on it and didn't do a good job. But we're back to where it should be right now, especially when Lion-O calls on Sword's power right before the fountain. But what I find really interesting is not only do they expand and do really good world building right now, but on top of that, you start seeing how the Thundercats interact with completely different groups, because the Burbles are friendly towards the Thundercats, right? A lot of the people of Third Earth are starting to get to know them a little more, realize they're able to be trusted. But the Warrior Maidens are like, you know what? We don't like these guys. They're in our territory. We'll go watch them, and we go find out what they're up to. But when they do interact, and when they finally get to know each other a little bit better, one thing I do find very nice about the Thundercats is, even though they are severely technically advanced compared to everybody else, not once do they look down on these other people for their different walks of life. Not once do they talk down to the Warrior Maidens about using bow and arrow instead of laser guns. They help them when they need to, and then lead them to their own devices when they don't need to be around. But other things, too, that I really enjoy is interactions in between. And there's actually some little gags there that they threw in. When the mutants are in the mess hall, and Slythe is, going on a tirade about, this is garbage. And he says, a jackal wouldn't eat this. But in the background, you see Jackalman, and he's whooping it down without hesitation. So that was like somebody got a kick there. And then we have him go on. He's like, what this place needs is a woman's touch. And Monkian, the simpleton, the complete moron of the mutants, is the one that goes, chauvinistic reptile, under his breath. Just perfect comedic timing. It was just fantastic. It wasn't played to make the characters look goofy. It was played to make the characters have some depth to their personalities and some differences between them.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate that as well, because it's, even though they're a tight unit, it would make sense that these, even though Slythe is the leader, I often look at all of them as equals. Like, I almost feel like they probably look down upon a Vulture Man on a physical standpoint, even though Vulture Man is quite a big guy anyway. But I kind of feel like that they really don't look down upon the other, and then I'm kind of surprised Monkian's character is not more outspoken in his opinions on Slythe. And the same thing with Jackalman. I mean, obviously it's showcased in Monkian's bargain and Jackalman's rebellion, when they decide to venture off on their own because they're just tired of, they're fed up with how Slythe runs things. But it's nice to see moments like that. I mean, and just something like that goes a long way in establishing the person, because you're going to see Monkian being the bumbling, not ridiculously oafish portrayal like a lot of henchmen were given in the 80s. But I felt like, it just adds a little bit more texture to their dynamic between the three of them. Because it's not like Slythe is sitting at the table and Monkian or Jackman is sitting off in the floor or something. They're all sitting together at the table. And it's just nice to see them have a difference of opinion over something, or like, you know what, I'm just tired of this guy's crap.
What's really funny is when you look at the mutants dynamic, it's almost like a stereotypical like high school setting, right? You got some of the mutants that are kind of like the jocks, but all of them will give each other grief, and then they'll turn around and especially give the nerd like Vulture Man the grief.
Yeah.
And Vulture Man is clearly smarter than everybody. He actually knows what he's talking about. They're like, huh, shut up, nerd. Go make his weapons, nerd.
But
it's amazing.
But they also realize, too, they can't do as much without Vulture Man, though.
Yeah, one of my favorite episodes is when he's like, you know what? Screw all y'all. I quit.
I know. One of the coolest things I've often thought is like it's a testament to how much of a poor leader Slide is. All three mutants have an episode where they decide, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go do my own thing. And, of course, it doesn't work out, but just how, there's not an episode where Slide says, you know what, I'm tired of, like, leading you guys, and you guys aren't pulling your share. No, they're all fed up with Slide. I've always thought that to be really cool that all three of those mutants had their own episode where they venture out and try to take on the world by themselves. But Slide is always the one that stays behind, almost as if like that's a way of saying he's not much of a leader. He pretends to be, but he can't do anything without the three of them, period.
Absolutely. But more to the episode is what I find interesting is you see a little bit more of Lion-O's childishness when the series starts, right? Oh, Panthro promised me he'd teach me.
Yeah. Tomorrow,
but yeah. What if tomorrow was today? So I find that fun, but I also think it's interesting. They showcase the different characters' points of view. They showcase their weaknesses. Tigra very much so gets wrapped up in his work. You see that later on in the series too. So it is absolutely within Tigra's personality to, well, this thing says there's Thundrillium here. I'm going to go deep into this cave without checking with anybody to get some What do you mean I'm turning old? What do you mean I'm becoming old? Oh, God, I have made mistakes.
Which underscores when he says, I feel so foolish later. Like, The first time I watched that, I thought, well, why does he feel foolish? He was supposed to be exploring for Thundrillium. And it's because he went into a situation where there were other reasons that was dangerous apart from it being a magic cave. It's generally dangerous to go into caves unprepared.
Absolutely. And then we see later on, Willow's like, you know what? Maybe they're not bad. Here, we're going to tell you about this fountain, but there's some poisonous winged serpents there. And when you're a little kid, you're like, excuse me, there's what? and go ahead.
Guys were dope. Like they were fluttering around with like realistic bird wings, and they were like, at first they were far away and you could just see them a little bit. And then there were the close-up shots where they're like fluttering on the ground and flopping around. Freaky. Dope.
So we get this cutaway where they're talking about how they're going to deal with this. And again, we see more show, don't tell. Chitaro's reaction is, I'm going to hold on to Tigra, make sure he's okay, because she's supportive like that. And Lion-O's like, all right, so here's the plan. I run in there and I hit everything with the sword, because that usually works. And Panthro's like, no, sword's mighty, but we're on a timetable here. So Panthro is the strategist, right?
Panthro's reinforcing the lesson that Lion-O learned from Jaga, but Lion-O actually is vindicated in that this is a situation where time is of the essence. So they have to find the right balance between getting a move on and actually coming up with a strategic plan. And all three acts of the story relate to the same theme. Lion-O didn't care about waiting for tomorrow with the Thunder Tank. Lion-O learns his lesson with Jaga. Lion-O is reminded of his lesson by Panthro. It's fantastic pacing.
Yeah, and it's just really good storytelling. The writer for this episode only did one other one, unfortunately, but it's just really solid writing. It's really solid characterization, and frankly, I think they hit the perfect balance in this specific episode. Honestly, I couldn't think of anything else to ask because they pack a lot of stuff in there, but they cover it well. You see a lot of different shows, even with some other shows from overseas that pack so many characters and so many events in a story that either you get bored with it because they can't do anything with it, or they overload it and you don't want anything to do with it afterwards. But in this episode, they got a really good balance of that. And I think it just shows that they had some really creative and very intelligent writers on staff at the time.
I also like, maybe this relates a little bit to what we talked about earlier about the portrayal of the mutants, but Jackalman twice is the one who kind of has the sneaky plan to like, let's go ambush them. Jackalman's always like thinking, because he's a jackal, right? He's always thinking of ways to move around his enemies and outflank his enemies rather than just beat them head on. And the Monkeyan bit, like I saw the chat joking, like Monkeyan's a male feminist. I think the humor of that bit is that because these are fantasy characters, they're villainous fantasy characters, it makes sense for them to have a chauvinistic perspective. Like they've literally been enslaving people, right? These villains are willing to do politically incorrect things. And one of the ways that they subvert that a little bit is with humor. So the chauvinist gag is funny because Monkeyan literally goes around kidnapping people. But it also serves to kind of help kids understand that kidnapping women is bad, kids, but using the humor.
Yeah. It's just interesting how they were able to pull this off. Let's see here. Oh, there we go. I accidentally hit the wrong button here. I think when it comes down to it, whether or not he is the politically correct character, I don't think that's really what they were going for. However, with a lot of fiction or a lot of stories in general, you can apply it to multiple situations. And when we look at how they interact and how they deal with certain situations, there's a lot that can be gleaned by that, regardless of who you are or what state in life you're in or anything like that. And that's why Aesop fables like can cover multiple generations and multiple decades, right? Because you can apply it to other things. And with ThunderCats, it taught a lot of individual lessons in this episode alone that I think is a testament to how good the writing staff was and how well they understood how children absorb things and how good storytelling leads to good decisions when they absorb it correctly. What do you think, Tyler?
For the most part, I mean, because stories like that, I feel like they tend to transcend. They get reinterpreted. They use elements of a lot of the stories in modern storytelling and children's animation. Because I don't feel like stories like that should be shied away from, much like grim fairy tales as well. Like I think kids need to be experienced with everything that a lot of the classic stories had to offer. I mean, because we dealt with it when we were kids, and like I don't see why kids should never experience the lessons, the fear, and the just logical thinking and experiences that you get from a lot of those original stories of the Aesop fables. And I always like to stress the grim fairy tales because I like the fact that like ThunderCats 2 didn't shy away from the evil aspects.
No, and a good story is not going to. You can deal with, and this is something I'm going to be covering here pretty soon, because I don't know if you saw in the group, and I'm going to segue a little bit here before we cover the comic. Somebody was posting in one of the He-Man groups I was in that here's the newest issue of He-Man versus Injustice, and it was a really bloody page. And Larry F. Houston commented on it. He's like, "Is this what fans want to see now? Is this what they think He-Man should be?" And it got my brain jogging. I'm like, well, what is mature storytelling? Is it blood and violence and sex? Well, no, it's really not. Themes are what decides what is a mature storytelling or not. Batman the Animated Series had this down to a T, and ThunderCats in a lot of cases did too. They never shied away from harsh topics. We had episodes that talked about what we know now as gaslighting. We had episodes that talked about, in more Aesop-y ways, child molestation. You had episodes that talk about how to make friends and what to do with actual people that are trying to hurt you. You had some very serious topics here that were being covered, but they were being covered in a manner that kids could digest, and they didn't shy away from it.
I agree.
And I'm probably rambling. I apologize.
I mean, I think it really does. I mean, I don't know why people feel like I encourage, if you're going to show fighting, you do need to see a certain level of violence, because I kind of feel like that's what we read comics for. Is why we watch, films. The violence helps tells the story. It's obviously very unnecessary in a comic book to have people, being decapitated and stuff like that. Unless it's, I feel like stuff like that works within the realms of a Conan book or something that you're dealing with a hard edge source as opposed to you're adapting an 80s animated series into comic book form. Yeah, we want to see Lionel kicking ass, beating the hell out of the mutants, throwing punches, maybe putting a dagger into Sly's leg or something like that. But we don't need to see, blood and guts and things like that. And but plus killing off important characters and just for the sake of some writer has no real clue how to tell a good story, so he decides, this will up the ante. I'll just kill off a major character.
Yep, good sign of bad, disingenuous writing.
Yeah.
I love the fact that the chat's finally realizing they can see you. Nightlight says, good. He says, JC, you are ripped.
Earlier, Evie of the Sea said, huge Jackman.
Thank you, guys.
Well, you got to keep in mind that some of these people, they're not used to being around people that are actually jacked in real life. So you're kind of a unicorn amongst horses.
I mean, but I'm a major nerd at heart. I mean, I may not look like it, but I'm about as nerdy as it gets. But this is the stuff that inspires me to want to lift weights. I want to feel like Lionel and Panthro and going out and beating the hell out of Taro and things like that, which I have drawn over there on the wall.
Yes, you do, and it's a good drawing.
Yeah. Thank you guys. I appreciate you guys saying that. And ThunderCats is an inspiration for me in the gym. I listen to some of the episodes when I'm working out sometimes too. Nothing more exhilarating than listen to the intro and lifting weights, man. That will get you pumped to go lift weights, man. Oh.
Absolutely. And ThunderCats is one of the reasons why I got into weapons and swordsmanship. It's the reason why I use a long sword. I love that weapon. It's fantastic.
Well, the show just continues to pay dividends for so many generations. It really does. And that's why crimes like
what shall not be named.
Yeah, I'm not even going to bring that up. It's been done. I don't need to remind good, wholesome fans that
the Dark Lord of reboots.
Yeah.
Got it, Marmaduke. All right, so we're going to go ahead and segue now into ThunderCats Wildstorm issue number 4. Marmaduke, why don't you go ahead and lead us into this?
All right. Well, for the Wildstorm series, Ed McGuinness, who some in the chat might recognize as the artist behind Batman, Superman, Public Enemies, he is back in issue 4 doing pencils, and inks are by Jason Martin. And I think this is some of the best. This is one of the best examples I've ever seen of like someone staying true to the spirit of a pre-existing property while giving it their own unique style and flair that kind of brings it to life in the context of a comics page. Because if you just imitated the cartoon style, it might look a little bit stiff in comic world where you have to make still images come to life. This is one of my favorite issues so far because of Ed McGuinness's pencils. And I think it's just it's really just a setup with a cliffhanger at the end, but it's such a great setup because pretty much they go encounter Mum-Ra. It looks like they beat him and rescue Wily Cat and save the day, right? But then Mum-Ra comes out and acknowledges that, you thought I underestimated you, but you're the ones who are predictable, ThunderCats. You always assume that you can just team up and beat me. And we can spoil, it's from 2001, so spoilers, I guess, but it reveals at the end that Groon, the Destroyer, is alive again, thanks to Mum-Ra deceiving the ThunderCats, which is just great, because I know him as a very intimidating character from the animated series, which means finally I get to see him go up against Lionel. So dope. It's a great cliffhanger.
Now, again, I love Ed McGuinness's art. I think that what they've done with the series, what they were trying to set up, unfortunately, they dropped the ball very quickly when we get into the return. But you're gonna see some interesting themes here, and I really wish they would have gone forward with it, in a direction different than what they took. But we'll get into that here within a couple of months when we finally get into ThunderCats: The Return. But things I like is you still see them true to their characters. Chitara's purpose, well, you're going to go take care of Wily Cat and Wily Kit. I get to fight. Lionel's like, I'm taking on Mum-Ra. Panthro, you know what to do. And what they do is a nod back to Lionel's anointment trials. And I don't know if you've gotten that far yet, Marmaduke, but you find out one of Mum-Ra's weaknesses is if you destroy his sarcophagus, like it zeroes him to nothing temporarily, right? So you can't kill Mum-Ra, but you can temporarily stop him by breaking or damaging his sarcophagus. So they do a nice little nod back to that while Lion-O and him are fighting. And what it does is it keys in, maybe Lion-O's going to go a little harder now, because even in the original cartoon, they'd fight and he'd beat Mum-Ra. But in this, Lion-O's a lot more direct on what they need to do here. It's, all right, I'm going to fight Mum-Ra, keep him distracted. You go do what needs to be done. We want to be quick in and out on this. And he cuts that through like an effective leader would. I like the fact that in this short run, we see Lion-O grow even more. Because even in the second season, he had grown quite a bit. He was beyond being a little kid in the mind anymore, past the anointment trials. But here you see him really starting to grow into I'm not just the leader of 7 people. I am the lord of a planet. So he takes that responsibility very seriously. So at this point, it's no longer playing touch and go with Mum-Ra and only acting in response. It's, if you're going to come at us, we're going to come at you harder, and we're going to deal with you quicker and more effectively than we did before. Which, if they had gone in a different direction, really would have upped the ante and made things a little more interesting, in my opinion. But they go a different direction with that. So this issue in and of itself, I think, is fantastic. It could be used to set up a lot of different things. And again, I love Ed McGuinness's art. I think that absolutely captures the spirit of the original cartoon.
If we're talking about dream reboots, I haven't read what they've gone on to do in future issues that you say isn't quite as good or what you were hoping. But what's nice about these comic adaptations is they become a lot of fodder for good ideas that were left untapped in the original series. And it's kind of, maybe it's a pipe dream to think they'd bring back the original ThunderCats, but maybe they could do like a spiritual successor that's like what happened after the ThunderCats,
I would just be happy if we can get a decent reboot that isn't something absolutely emotionally bankrupt or morally bankrupt.
Yeah.
My only hope at this point is that Warner Brothers devalues the property to the point to where I can crowdfund and buy it. That's about as far as my hope goes at this point.
Oh, hey, I want to throw this idea at Tyler because I mentioned it to you behind the scenes. So
don't do it. Don't do it.
I think it's worth it. No. We're talking about the Unmentionable show with
no.
All right. So my idea is Lio has absolutely refused to review the reboot that shall not be named, and I kind of want to review it just to see how bad it is. So my thought is maybe on like future episodes of the ThunderCast, I will try to tell you what the plot of the evil reboot is, and you guys will see if you can guess if it's a completely real plot from the show, or if I'm just BSing you. What do you think, Tyler?
I think you're lucky that
I would much rather watch an Apple Brown than a show in any capacity. I mean, honestly, you could make up whatever you want. I wouldn't put it past those morons to say that that's what they're doing. I mean, I feel like you say whatever you want. I'm like, I would believe they would have done that. I would have believed that too, because I just feel like they're dumber in the head than a hog is in the ass. So I just kind of feel like I would start foaming at the mouth if you went into a segment about that, like, because I just have I wouldn't have anything remotely interesting to say. I wouldn't have any kind of feedback. I wouldn't have any kind of response. I would probably, if I could find lethal injection, I would gladly do it right there on the spot.
Well, there you go. You see, that's how the internet works. See, humor, pain is funny when it happens to someone else. So your pain at realizing how bad the evil reboot is, that would be the medicine all the other ThunderCats fans need to feel.
No, I like Tyler. Tyler is a good man. I will not subject him to that.
All right. That's good. You guys won't demean yourselves for the likes and the views. That's good.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm not giving that show. I mean, I barely. I wish I hadn't even acknowledged the She-Ra cartoon. I was forced to, but I'm like, you know what? No, not in my own home.
All right, I'll be the designated ThunderCats masochist since I'm the noob. I'm the one who has to watch it.
Yeah, we'll throw you to the wolves. We're okay with that. Well, look at it this way. Look at it this way, guys. At least we're not Sonic fans.
Oh, God. He actually doesn't look it bad when they finally showed a different angle on him. It's just. I wish Hollywood would learn what the Uncanny Valley is, and they need to have like a poster with a definition of Uncanny Valley in every Hollywood office where they reboot other properties.
They won't, because that requires, imagination, and they can't have that. But all right, so we've covered the 3 items here. Unless Tyler, do you have any thoughts of issue 4 that you can recall?
I have recollections of that issue, and I remember being very excited about Grun because Grun is my favorite evil warrior, so to speak, next to Rotaro. So I was very excited to see him show up, and it's a shame that Ed's run on the book was so short-lived in general, because I that was probably my favorite thing about this ThunderCats book was I liked the one-off issues that had one story, it was completed, and you moved on to the next adventure, much like the cartoon. Like I'm sick and tired of, everything's continuity based. Like it's great to acknowledge previous issues, but I miss self-contained issues where you don't feel like, because that's the way Marvel and DC have been doing things for God knows how long. Or I mean, the days of like Spider-Man just taking on Electro in some random issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Not an issue of continuity. It acknowledges things that happened in previous issues, but it's its own contained story. And then you move on to the next one, and he's taking on the Rogues or something like that in the next issue, and then you're off and running the 3 parts. I really liked that when this was regular series, and I liked the return. But then after that, that's kind of when I checked out. But I really wish Ed had just been a consistent writer or artist, on ThunderCats, and it was just a bunch of contained issues of getting to see, more Rotaro, or more. I don't know. Maybe I'm not a fan of the episode in the slightest, but maybe another opportunity at Mongor or something like that. I kind of felt like there was just so much that could be done with this comic book, and I hate that it was so short-lived and then they take off into the whole miniseries stuff. But I'd say probably the best of the ThunderCats, entertainment-wise, outside the original cartoon, this first run of comic books that was done with Ed McGuinness, I just thought was probably the best, I think.
All right, I don't disagree with that. I agree with it 100%.
That sounds like the most canned response. I mean, you sound like a bought politician with that.
Well, but the thing to consider though is you are giving customers valuable feedback. I think that's the good aspect of why YouTube exists, is that people say, okay, what's the ThunderCats when they see the awful reboot? And then it's the old fans that get to say, here's the best stuff that's related to this franchise. Here's the stuff you can skip over unless you're like a super fan, right? And all 4 of the first issues, maybe a little uneven in the art style, but a completely solid, beautiful comic series. And it's engaged me as a new fan, and I think it's really valuable for older fans like you guys who've read this stuff to kind of like encourage new fans to check this stuff out, because it's really worth your time if you're enjoying the old cartoon now.
It is, and I'm all about pushing very specific stuff, because ThunderCats, much like He-Man and G.I. Joe and stuff like that, it becomes lost in the public eye of making fun of all this stuff and treating it as all like it's all silly stuff from your childhood, as opposed to great storytelling, unforgettable villains, and heroes you would want to be. And I kind of feel like, if people aren't aware of stuff like this in very specific episodes of ThunderCats, like people are going to continue to think that it's just that, it's that silly cartoon from the 80s that I thought was cool, but they don't realize just how great the show is aged, that it stands the test of time, that it has so much more to offer than, all those lazy morons whose sole purpose is to find jokes and everything, even when there is no comedy in it. Much like that jerk off that did the intro for the ThunderCats Roar commercial or trailer, whatever the hell it was. Where they think, we can find it lends itself to humor quite well. What the hell are you talking about? So I'm all about preserving the essence of ThunderCats, because I took the stuff serious as a kid. I didn't find it to be funny, and as I get older, I'm like, I take it just as serious, if not more serious. There's so many things I appreciate in ThunderCats that I didn't as a child, and especially with the storytelling, with the character portrayals and things like that. And I hate it that no one has time to actually devote to sitting down and actually watching this stuff. They'd rather listen to some moron on a YouTube channel who just likes to sit around and make fun of stuff from the 80s and just take his word for it and then go to Walmart and buy like a generic T-shirt with the ThunderCats logo on it. Say you're a fan, but you say, "Did you ever watch the episode of The Mountain? What's that?"
Yeah, it's the disingenuousness and the cynicism a lot of these people have. Well, I only like this thing ironically. I only like this thing because, haha, I have a memory. I thought it was funny. It's like, no, it's okay to like something, even if it's from the 80s, even if it's a child's property. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an asinine viewpoint. Haha, this is so funny. Isn't this funny? It was funny because they did this, and in this other context it wasn't meant for, makes it hilarious. Isn't Fisto's name funny? Ooh, is it sexual? No, it's not a sexual innuendo. You just lack imagination because you're a mentally stunted moron.
Exactly. I get, that's probably the one thing that irritates me the most, which is why I tend to stay away from a lot of stuff on social media that makes fun of this stuff. When I see people pop me up like, illustrations of Skeletor and He-Man acting and homoerotic gestures and stuff like that, like, I got no tolerance for that stuff. I really don't. Like, I don't think it's funny. I don't think it's cute, and it's not being a homophobe. It's just you're portraying characters in a manner that, that's not how they're portrayed. That's not what those characters are. And it's ThunderCats. I feel the exact same way because I hold ThunderCats and He-Man essentially in the same light, and a few other properties as well. And I have no tolerance for people who want to go out of their way and post in various forms of social media. Hey, look at all this silly stuff that I wrote or drew about ThunderCats. Oh, look how feminine I drew Lion-O here. Or look how, homoerotic this picture is with Fisto and He-Man. Just...
While I will say I think that art is something that's going to evolve as people go. And again, I think people get different things out of them. My issue is more of the fact that you have a lot of these people that go on and they make these claims or these allegations, or more so they mock something. Number one, without understanding it. And number two, out of sheer cynicism, and for whose gain? Well, for nobody's gain. I mean, there are things that have permeated culture that have no real basis in anything that came from, like the whole Skeletor goes, yeah. Well, he never once in the actual series went, yeah. That came from the Four Non-Blondes parody video that somebody put on the internet way back in the early 2000s. Yeah. Well, that in and of itself has its own place within the zeitgeist of internet culture. That is a disingenuous look at what He-Man the series was about. And that's what bothers me, is when people base what they think a cartoon is on the opinions of other people without proper knowledge of what actually happened in these shows. And that bothers me, and it will always bother me. Well, ThunderCats was just made to promote a toy line. Well, no, it wasn't. If you actually know what you're talking about, it wasn't. And it was just a cartoon to sell toys, that doesn't mean anything, because it doesn't detract from the value of the writing. It doesn't detract from the creativity of the world building. And I absolutely hate it. I got into it with somebody on Twitter, like, can you name me, here's a list of all the She-Ra episodes. Name me all the ones that are good, or all the ones you think have excellent writing. I give them a list of 10 immediately. I'm like, and by the way, here's all the writers from the show. And I list off their accolades and their credentials. Like, J. Michael Straczynski was one of the main writers of She-Ra. He went and made Stargate. I would love to see you trash talk his writing. Complete silence.
And Babylon 5.
Yeah, complete silence. Nothing from them. Because they can't defend it, because they're basing their information on somebody else. And I cannot stand that. And I won't tolerate it.
Tell us how you really feel.
I feel like I am the physical incarnation of Doom Guy, and I'm about to rip and tear through everything.
What I'll add to that is a show like ThunderCats came from a place of raw creativity, which is why there are occasionally silly episodes, because they were coming up with stuff whole cloth. Like, what's going to be the problem for this episode, right? Because of the episodic format, they had to come up with something unique and interesting every single episode. And sometimes it doesn't make sense from a world building perspective, but it is just this raw, beautiful energy of just, there was nothing, and now there's this whole world with all this interesting stuff in it. It's like they're creating toys for far from just selling toys. They're actually creating toys for everyone else's imagination that you get to play with. And to get into that kind of creative space, you have to have sincerity and care about what you're doing. You don't get to create something that's meaningful if you think you're just having a jolly lark and telling a couple silly Billy jokes, right? And I think that there is a generational divide to some of this. Like, the people who didn't grow up with ThunderCats didn't get the anger over ThunderCats, but they get it if the thing from their generation, like Powerpuff Girls, gets an awful reboot that misses the point of like the old Powerpuff Girls was a violent show. That was its point. It was edgy and trying to push the buttons of what they could get away with on television, and then they sanitize it. And the people who grew up with the original Powerpuff Girls see the problem. If we can have conversations where we can explain the reason for why we're passionate for these old stories, some people won't listen. They just won't. They don't care to hear another opinion. But the people who will listen, I think we can sort of cross the generational barrier and make the point that there is a reason to object to a cartoon or to be unhappy with a new rendition of a cartoon if it's missing the point of what was good in the original and what was wholesome and powerful in the original.
Well, jump on like the biggest problem I have with all this stuff, and it doesn't have to be something that I grew up on. It's this consensus that everything now is geared towards comedy. That the days of action adventure shows, well, we'll say it's action adventure, but we're going to have nothing but slapstick comedy and juvenile jokes and borderline, sexual innuendo throughout the show because, well, we'd rather write really bad, cheap comedy than tell a very serious tone action adventure cartoon. I mean, that's my biggest problem with the idea of even rebooting ThunderCats anyway with this is that it's comedy. And they treat it as if like ThunderCats is a silly property. I mean, it lends itself to humor because, oh, look at it. Then it's just like, then clearly, I'm sure these guys did not, this is just what was given to them. Doesn't make them any less guilty. But I kind of feel like I can sympathize with anybody that grew up on a particular cartoon, and I never watched Power. Is it Power or Powderpuff?
Powerpuff, Power. Yeah.
I never could get that right, but I know the passion and fandom that show had, and if it was brought back, that or Sailor Moon or or even Power Rangers. I grew out of Power Rangers, I think, after the first 2 seasons. It doesn't pull up to me at all. But if they were to go back to the beginning and reboot it, or like, it's like if the new Power Rangers movie that came out, 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, it was such garbage. Oh, my God.
No, I had no desire to see it. And it did look... But...
I'll put it this way. Tyler. I've sat through every single Michael Bay film. I haven't walked out once. They're garbage, but I haven't walked out once. I almost walked out of Power Rangers 4 times. It was that bad.
Bad example. All right, I will say, just for the sake of this discussion we're having, the trailers didn't portray the Power Rangers movie as like, hey, this is some silly stuff. Remember this when you were little? Now we're going to make fun of it and not treat it seriously. It's all be tongue in cheek and making fun of Zordon and Goldar and this and that. I mean, it looked like they were trying to tell a very poor version of a somewhat serious Power Ranger story. But it didn't look like the tone was all about being super silly. It just looked like they're making a really trashy movie. But with everything now, it's like everything's got to be funny. And I know I've ranted about this on Fans of Power and Beyond Retro and Capes and Commentaries and any other time I got a microphone in front of my face. And I just kind of feel like that's the popular thing now. Even with Star Wars, everything's geared towards let's make everything funny. Let's brighten it up for everybody and send people out of the theater laughing instead of getting fist pumps and excited and just like, oh, I want to know more about this. I'm so excited. Like it's like those days are gone. And I kind of feel like it's just an epidemic in entertainment. And I know not everything is comedy. I'm as far removed from current entertainment as I possibly could be because I'm not interested in what they have to offer. But I just kind of feel like, man, that they just don't seem interested in writing action adventure anymore overall.
Well, that's because, unfortunately, they've gone very sterile in what's going on with the animation industry. They want to make things as squeaky clean in terms of content. Not so much in terms of jokes, but comedy is really easy to write in some cases. And
it doesn't look like they're trying.
They're not. They're not. But that keeps money easy coming, and they don't have to worry about anybody getting too mad about it. But we're talking about things being messed with, and yeah, everybody thinks it's funny until it's their time to get hit. And I'm waiting. Like I said last time, I'm waiting for something to happen with Harry Potter, and then the generation right after me is going to lose their mind. I'll be like, yeah, how's it feel? Not so funny anymore.
And I really do. I sympathize with anybody, even, and there's a lot of properties I do not care about. Harry Potter's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I can sympathize with people who feel like, okay, now their property's being messed with because some idiot decides he wants to come along and let's make it funny today. And reinterpretation means making it funny. And I'm like, I sympathize. Like, even though I would stand on the barricades with Harry Potter fans to stand up for their right to have something that's taking their source material seriously.
Yeah.
Not Harry Potter, but I or their rights. Like, no, we want our stuff taken seriously, and I think everybody's entitled to that. I mean, like, I would. It's the cheap way by hiring someone who has no connection to it, and thinks all of it's silly, and it's like, this lends itself to humor, and that's what I'll do. That's how I'll remake this, is just make it, because I think it's silly and goofy, and the world will embrace my viewpoint here. So
in Harry Potter's case, it's J.K. Rowling, the author, who is destroying everyone's childhoods because she doesn't understand the source material.
No, the kicker is when Tyler said that he'd be glad to stand by them. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, nothing.
Oh. It made me think of Return of the King when they're standing outside the gates. Tyler would be like, I never thought I'd stand with a Harry Potter fan. Well, how about a friend?
I could live with that.
All right, so we're coming close to our close here. What would you guys like to discuss next time as far as villains go, since we're back to villains now?
I was going to let Marmaduke.
All right. Well, I don't know who you guys talked about before I joined the cast. I know you've talked about Groon. Today we talked about Panthro. I don't know who else we talked about. I asked to talk about. Let me think. I asked to talk about Doomgazely. I forgot her name.
Tashi.
Right. I asked to talk about Tashi once, and I can't think of any other villains off the top of my head. So why don't you, Lyle? Why don't you recommend someone who you haven't talked about in the cast?
Cool. How about Captain Shiner?
I'm cool with Shiner.
All right. Season 1 or season 2?
He's in season 1. He shows up for a little bit in season 2.
All right.
Samurai Raccoon. Okay, Hordak is He-Man, man. We can't. Sorry, looking at the chat, and Samurai Raccoon's like, you should talk about Hordak. I'm like, I mean, I'd love to, but this is a ThunderCat podcast.
What said that?
I think he's just goofing on us.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, what? They want to hear Hordak. We've discussed that on Fans of Power podcast. Check it out.
Absolutely. If you guys want a good He-Man podcast, that is literally the only one I would recommend listening to is Fans of Power.
We make it well worth your while. We give you something no one else has.
Nice.
Also, I'm going to address something else. Samurai Raccoon said, going to go ahead and give you a little bit of information here, man. Bob Camp, who was the character designer on SpongeBob, his first gig in animation was a secondary character designer for ThunderCats. So there's your fun little history fact for animation for the day, Samurai Raccoon. All right, so go ahead, Tyler.
With what do you want me to go ahead with?
I thought you were about to say something. I may have misspoke.
I was going to say, just a testament to just how, I mean, obviously he was a very skilled secondary designer, because I think ThunderCats had some of the best secondary characters in terms of background characters, world building characters that were just as plot devices. Not all of them were great, but for the most part, they did a really good job of creating different.
Good God, Marmaduke, did you just leave in the middle of our podcast? I think Marmaduke might have died.
Or he's been kidnapped on the podcast by Warner Brothers.
Oh, no. That's all right. I'm ready for him. I think I've got a couple of statues over here I can just chuck at them that I don't need anymore. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close out. We're going to give the chat a couple of minutes if they have any more questions or comments, and then we're going to go ahead and sign out. I'm going to take this moment to thank the people who sponsor this, like Jeff Scott with Comic Basics and Avis and Mega Umi, who support me on Patreon. Special thanks as always go to Mr. Tyler Baker, the hugest man in all the land, and to Marmaduke, may he rest in peace.
Thanks for having me on, man.
You came back.
Sorry to call on nature.
Okay, Jeremy, the answer threatening villain, I'd say it's Hordak. Between Hordak and Skeletor.
Oh, Skeletor.
You think he's more?
Always Hordak would come close, but Skeletor would always eventually be triumphant.
Okay. Let's see here. If I wanted to read a Thundercat comic, what is the official? It depends on what you want to look for, man. There's a few out there. If you want to read something classic, I would go with the original Marvel run. If you want something more varied in taste, I'd go with the UK comics from the original run. And if you want something more modern, you'd have to go with the Wildstorm comics.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and end the podcast. Would you guys like to say goodbye to everybody? Give some final words here.
Thank you for having me on. I've just really enjoyed the entire ThunderCats franchise, and I think this is a great boat for anyone to jump on. Who's you don't even have to be unsatisfied with modern cartoons to want to hop on board it. It just survives so well.
I'm really glad to hear that. I mean, because I often felt like so many times if people would give a lot of these cartoons, it's nostalgia has some to do with it, but to me, it's more about the quality that transcends time and everything that goes for He-Man, ThunderCats, G.I. Joe, Turtles, and various other cartoons. Some that's not always the case. It's more about nostalgia, but ThunderCats clearly is a prime example of just the perfect cartoon. It doesn't get enough credit for the writing and everything else that made it the package that it is. And I really wish, to close out what we talked about earlier, people would make their own opinions. If you think ThunderCat sucks, think it sucks because you actually sat and watched it and not listened to some jerk off on a YouTube channel who's trying to be, smarmy and quirky and witty and, oh man, I'm so humorous. And
Top 10 totally lame episodes of ThunderCats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. That kind of stuff. Don't listen to those idiots like the nostalgia critic and stuff like that. He's just making a name by just slamming everything that's vintage for the most part. Give it a shot. Don't listen to parodies of it on YouTube. Actually watch clips of it. We're not saying this is just, angry fanboys who want our child to protect it. No, there's some genuinely good stuff, and that's what we're doing. We're not doing this to reflect on, I remember back when I watched that episode. No. There's so much more to this stuff, and it needs to be recognized by your own eyes. And if you don't like it, then okay, then there's nothing more that we can do. But there's just a lot to be discovered, and you owe it to yourself. If you're a fan of animation or a student of 80s cartoons and things like that, you really owe it to yourself to actually sit down and try out. I mean, we've covered various episodes already in the past, library of episodes already, and we mentioned like the Mountain. I don't know how many times. If that ain't a clue, like, hey, check out it. It's on iTunes to buy for $1.99.
Yes, it is.
Buy it on YouTube. iTunes sucks.
Well, yeah. Or either way, just seek it out. Seek out the Ghost Warrior. No, it doesn't make too much sense logic-wise, but God, it's a badass episode of Grunin the Destroyer. And so many other episodes as well. But yeah, I'm done ranting.
Okay, so next time we are going to cover. We're going to cover the character retrospective of Captain Shiner. We're going to cover the episode The Tower of Traps and Wildstorm ThunderCats issue 5. I'm going to close out here. Let's see here. Evie did have a question for Tyler. She wants to know if you binge trains like Mr. Incredible does.
What's the question again?
If you bench press trains like Mr. Incredible does.
I bench press automobiles. I'm working my way up 2 trains.
Actually, the funny thing is, earlier Jeremy asked what type of workouts you do if it's bodybuilding or calisthenics, and I actually said earlier you find random vehicles and start benching them. So I guess that backs up my theory.
Just straight bodybuilding. I don't do any of the trendy stuff. No CrossFit. Nothing that's popular on social media. It's classic, old school bodybuilding. What everybody was doing in the 60s, 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s. That's all I do, and that's all I'll ever do. If it worked for them, it worked for me, and that's just trying to look as much like He-Man or classic Arnold in the movies or something like that, or even Linus. So just classic bodybuilding people. Nothing trendy, nothing fancy, just old school ass kicking bodybuilding.
Freaking rad. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and sign off now. I'll check with you guys after we stop broadcast. Everybody, take it easy, and we'll catch you next month.
Later.
Later.